Anna Marie Klose has a BFA in film and television from New York University and MLIS with a concentration in digital libraries from Rutgers University, and an MA in history from William Patterson University. Her prior work includes the Baudian Roman coins collection at Rutgers, the MD Soar shared repository in Maryland with the University System of Maryland and affiliated institutions, Library Consortium, and the WPS Sphere repository at William Patterson University. She is currently the Metadata Initiatives Librarian at the Ohio State University Libraries. In that capacity, she works on metadata for digitized and born digital special collections and archival materials. Now I will hand it off to Anna Marie.
Hi, everybody. So I know it's the last session of the day, so thank you for hanging in there. The nice thing about what we're going to do is this is a collaborative working session. So instead of listening to people, I'm hoping that we're going to talk together about what we've been learning about linked data or what we've been doing in our own institutions, and really see this as an opportunity for sharing. I'm very much a practitioner. I'm still learning about linked data. So I really am looking forward to getting some feedback, some housekeeping. I know that people have been using the Q&A. We're kind of going to go away from that and use the chat now so that people can talk. And so we don't have too many people talking at once. I'm going to be reading the chat, or Christine and Michelle may be reading chat. And if somebody has a lot to say, we could elevate you to speak verbally. We're just trying to keep a handle on all the responses, which hopefully there will be good responses. And I know people are probably tired as it's the end of the day. So being a practitioner, back at the LoadLam 2020 Summit, which is a non-conference, I proposed an issue I was having, and it might be a problem that you're having at your institutions. And I'm very much coming at this as a librarian who works with metadata in a database. I'm using Samvera Hyrax, and we're trying to use Dublin Core, a little bit of BIBFRAME, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. And I had an internal stakeholder that wanted to add a field that was custom, something that isn't expressed in Dublin Core or BIBFRAME or schema.org or anywhere that I could find. And so one of my questions when I came to this group is, how do you address that? What are the decisions you make in order to create an ontology or use another ontology with Dublin Core? Or what else do you do? And I got a bunch of different answers, and I wasn't completely satisfied with the answer, but having now been housebound for months with the pandemic, I'm really glad that I got to LA. I learned a lot at that unconference. So first off, since we have a large group, I've set up a poll so that people can kind of share what linked data ontologies they're using. And I understand I'm coming at this in terms of metadata, which is data about data, but I'm aware also that linked data could be about data itself. You could be using linked data to store and explore different kinds of knowledge that is very different in my frame set of what I'm working with. So I would ask you all if you could fill out this poll, and I'm just gonna unshare my screen for a moment, and I'm gonna put the poll in the chat. And all right, so I'm putting this in the chat. And it is just a text box. So you're going to put into the text box each of the ontologies you're using. Unfortunately, I could only figure out how to set it up in terms of you're going to have to enter it each time. So
not comma separated. We just like enter it and then hit enter and then do it again.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I was trying some different polling software and there was limits. So I set this up as a word cloud so that, and we'll see how well this actually works, but I put in, for instance, BIBFRAME and Dublin Core. And I don't know, let me try to share my screen and see if you can see the results. So yeah, if people can people see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So we're seeing things like LCNAF 2.0 BIBFRAME. I think Dublin Core got split up. Wikidata, LD4P, id.loc.gov, and a lot of BIBFRAME. So while people are putting in their answers, I wanted to bring up some food for thought on my end. So again, as I said, I'm working with Samvera Hyrax. It's built on Fedora. And one of our issues is we're primarily set up with Dublin Core. And there was a Samvera group that made recommendations for converting mods metadata to RDF. And it's a combination of Dublin Core, schema.org, BIBFRAME, and a lot of other related standards. So I'm just going to drop a link to that in the chat. And I'm going to go back to the report, and I'm going to refresh and see what else we're talking about.
And I'm going to mention again here something that was said in the chat, which is that if after you've entered one thing, you can hit refresh and you'll see the form again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry you can only enter it once. I was trying to figure out how to use some of this. We have some schema.org FOF. We have some Getty, Rare. Unfortunately, word cloud made it a little bit messy. All right. I don't know if people need more time with that, but I think we're seeing that it's a very library heavy group. Okay, Dublin Core getting more attention, ARM. So those were some of the things I was thinking about, because I don't know about you, but I tend to refer to Dublin Core as being a one-size-fits-all t-shirt. It really doesn't work in all cases. So you see things like here, you've got some rare metadata ontologies, and you have, I don't know if this is premise. And so we've got some different ways that we're trying to take these gaps, and we're using ontologies like puzzle pieces, and we're piecing them together to try to express the semantic meaning that we want. And the question is, are we happy with it? What are the decisions that make you think that was that was what you wanted to use, and in what circumstances? So for instance, Fabio is not one I'm familiar with. I don't know if that's part of something else. Scos, yeah, Prov. So I think some of the questions that I would like people to bring up in chat is, for instance, when you're trying to use these different ontologies together, do you find a gap between what you were using and what your needs are? Because I know that personally, I have found gaps about what I can and cannot use in terms of what my internal stakeholders want. And so I would also think, like, why did you decide to develop or use a specific linked data ontology or ontologies with the primary ontology you use? And you might just have one, or you might have multiple. Oh, thank you. I see that some people have put in what Fabio is. And also, how are you combining various ontologies to kind of make this perfect fit? Because as I showed with the Samvera mods to RDF recommendations, it's a little tricky sometimes to figure out how can we make these semantic connections. So I'm checking the chat, and does anyone want to chime in about what those decisions are? And we're all making Fabio jokes. Thank you. I can't believe it's not butter. So yeah, here, Fabio, the Ferber aligned bibliographic ontology, great. So does anyone want to chime in chat? I don't know if we're getting any comments. Okay, so
there's yeah, go ahead.
I see we have a comment from Alexandra Alicia Provo, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think about the tension and balance between local needs and interoperability. Great, because yeah, that is something that I think about. Is there any other considerations that people have? Because again, we've seen that there's a lot of interesting work being done in the LD4P community in terms of extending, you know, ontologies into, you know, what do you do with rare materials? I mean, that's a really great consideration that we think about. And I see that Lauren Geiger, I second Alexandra, it's also about the amount of materials needing to be added to a digital collection, staff, and time. So those are more, you know, great considerations. So please feel free to talk, as free as we can be, with us all on chat. And so Zoe Dobbs writes, can be difficult to reconcile BF, I guess is that BIBFRAME, with how we think about WMI under RDA LRM. Yeah, those are big challenges. Yes, it is difficult to reconcile BIBFRAME with that. And I'm actually in the, I work with non-MARC metadata. So it's interesting, I'm only using BIBFRAME on a smaller level. And then Jesse Lambertson writes, well, I think an ongoing issue is the incomplete implementation of LRM in BIBFRAME. So we are always looking at that. And of course, both LC and Share VDE have had to implement something that was not created within BIBFRAME, such as the Opus and the Hub. I think those are great comments, because I know that when a lot of us were at ALA last year, there were some discussions about when certain things were going to get finalized, when were things solid to use. And Alexandra Alicia Provo writes, always trying to reuse a term that already exists, but being open to making a local property if it serves a local need. And that was definitely something that concerned me. And Jesse writes, or the super work. So again, we do have the problems with the semantic structuring of these resources. So some of you have touched upon things that I've thought about, and I actually, I made a list of potential considerations, and I was thinking about domain-specific needs because, for instance, like a lot of us work in libraries, so we have to follow the library way of doing things. You know, we're very much looking at what is LC doing, and we have to think about compliance with that. But as you heard in my bio, I worked on a collection of Roman Republican coins at Rutgers, and at the end of the day, we ended up sharing our metadata with the American Numismatic Society has a set of linked data resources for sharing metadata about coins, and that was an interesting thing that we had to look at. I see Faith has added something. We analyzed a number of data models and selected the one that fitted our needs the best from testing with a number of scenarios, and the selected model, Matterhorn RDF, fitted our needs the best, but was made up of a number of existing ontologies. The ontology reuse was one of the reasons we selected over the option that had a similar conceptual model. We then applied it to our data and found where the gaps were, at which point we looked to other existing ontologies that met our needs. Closure of records or parts of records was a bit issue. So that's really good. And then Zoe Dobbs writes, regarding domain specific, ARM is designed to extend BIBFRAME for rare materials, art and rare materials. So yeah, again, BIBFRAME doesn't fill all of our needs. So as I said, here I had a list of potential considerations, and I think some people have talked about load on specific things that touched upon their specific institutions. And I have, for instance, on my list, you know, infrastructure and technical support. So again, like if your institution is small, or you don't have the infrastructure to set up a brand new ontology or something, like that's just not feasible. But I would think you also think about your greater community. My problem with setting up a term that my internal stakeholders would use was that you might not even, it might not be used by any other communities. And is it really worthwhile, you know, setting that up? You're not going to set up a whole ontology for one tiny concept.
There's another comment from Alex Kröge in the chat. She says, Anna Marie mentioned the importance of semantic alignment, I think. I haven't read it in a while, but I think this article cautions against, quote, Frankenstein ontologies, which can happen if original semantics are not kept in mind / preserved. And she gives a citation here, which is great.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Alexandra, and thank you, Christine, for reading that. That gave me a chance to drink some water. And yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing I think about is we don't want to have Frankenstein ontologies. I think that's a really beautiful point, is that we're juggling all these different concerns. And I think like we had Eric speaking about some of the stuff at the last session about why you're doing certain things. And it behooves us to do this in a meaningful fashion, because I have colleagues who are not metadata librarians, and they ask me, well, do you think there's going to be fewer standards in the future with linked data? And I think that, no, that's not really the case. We're going to have more standards. And if I can pull up the link that I wanted to have handy, but that is our linked data open cloud. I mean, look at that. And we're talking about when you're going to add more ontologies, how you're going to do that, and what is the reasoning. And, you know, one of my concerns is, do we start going into a Tower of Babel, you know, or are we really leveraging the semantic web? Because if we're each making up separate ontologies when people are doing similar work, is that meaningful? Obviously, when you have things happening in LD4P, that is community-based, which is really great. But I think about like, how do various communities shape the development of ontologies? Will we have more standards or fewer? And how do we leverage that idea of the semantic web? Because I think a lot of us, I mean, I remember from library school reading Tim Berners-Lee's concept of the semantic web. And the question is, are we getting closer to that or further away? And when you talk about Frankenstein ontologies, yeah, that's a bit of a scary thought. So at least from a metadata or data perspective. Yeah, that's a good point. Alexandra brings up that there's a distinction between linked open data versus linked data, and that's true. Linked data might be highly localized. I thank you for sharing that, Alexandra, because that's a good point, is you may not care about what the greater community is doing. We had some presentations where people were trying to use linked data in terms of discovering things or visualizing things. So just for curiosity, I set up a poll, and I'll put the link in the chat for this. And this is that list of, okay, sorry, I got the wrong link. Let's see if I can do this. So this is a poll that is these kinds of potential considerations, and kind of you can click off as many as you like. And the idea is we're going to look at the results, if I did it properly, and talk about what are some of these concerns that really affect you. And yeah, Alexandra, would you like to have the mic at some point? You're welcome to do so. It looks like Alexandra had to leave. Yeah, if people want to speak, I know it's been a long day. It's been a really great day and we're learning a lot, but So if you could fill out that poll and let's see what people have to say about, oh, you're not seeing the link?
I'll paste it in. I think you posted
sorry.
it. Oh, no, I did it wrong. Yeah, I think you did it privately by accident, but I can, I'll just, if you want to keep talking, I'll just put it in.
Okay, yeah, no, we want more than Christine's feedback.
Me too.
Okay, yeah, okay, well, we definitely want your feedback, Christine, but we also want more feedback. So if people can fill out the poll, again, I'm trying to kind of do a little bit of a, you know, trying to poke people to talk, because one of my favorite quotes, and I'm sure you have all heard about that, is standards are like toothbrushes. Everybody wants one, but nobody wants to use anybody else's. And I think we've definitely had that experience sometimes in terms of linked data is, you know, in which cases do we want to use each other's standards? And I think librarians, at least when it comes to BIBFRAME or something like that, are definitely eager to do that. But then depending on the community, they may not want to use the existing standards. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts or if people are just waiting for other people to chime in. So for instance, a lot of people were talking about Wikidata. And that's really interesting because those of us who are librarians who are we're trying to connect to Wikidata in special ways. I'm sorry, my cat's climbing all over my dining room table, so there's noise in the background. We're trying to use Wikidata to connect to users in other ways. But again, as other people have pointed out, like we don't have control over Wikidata at a certain point. And we also think about issues of interoperability. We have to think about data sharing and aggregation. So for instance, when I use Dublin Core, I have to think about the fact that, you know, harvesting records. I think about like, if we're going to send our records to DPLA, what are they going to look like in that kind of streamlined fashion for harvesting? And yeah, Christine's pointing out Wikidata's ontology often seems like several ontologies sharing a namespace. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So yeah, there's a lot of these different concerns going on. So I'm gonna go into see if we have any feedback in terms of the poll. So unfortunately, it's being a little slow. And I think if any of you had attended some of the Wikidata presentations, you can see that some of the advantages were visualization, there's how things link to Wikipedia and all that, and that's a very interesting thing for us to utilize. And I'm sorry, I have been having connectivity issues today, so that may be why I'm not getting the results. But those are various things that we're thinking about. Has anyone been limited by the technical infrastructure that they work with? Because again, as I said, Samvera Hyrax, I'm really kind of forced to use Dublin Core, and I really have a love-hate relationship with Dublin Core, so I kind of have to throw in some BIBFRAME here and there, and some other ontologies. Jesse, thank you. Jesse Lambertson writes, one of the issues is that it takes so many resources to develop a successful ontology, so once one gets headway, that will often become a standard, even if quite imperfect. That's great. Yeah, no, do you have a specific one that you want to talk about, Jesse? BIBFRAME, okay. Do you want to take the mic? Because we could do that.
Okay, let's see if I can give Jesse the mic. I haven't actually tried this live in a session before. I've hit the allow to talk button. Give it a shot.
Okay, let's try it.
Can you hear me okay?
Hi there, yes. Hi, Jesse. Thank you for talking.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, so I think relative to that previous comment about the LRM in BIBFRAME, it's, that's what we're going to be using a lot when we start looking at linked data futures. And of course, right now in our, the idea is that the data model is kind of a derivation of a larger abstraction, to go back to another presentation earlier today by somebody else. And so the issue then is that because the resources required to develop that are sort of being, so unfortunately, a lot of the resources being sort of given to BIBFRAME are sort of handled by one major institution, which of course has its own needs. So that means the rest of us kind of need to use it because we need to have the larger interoperability, which of course a lot of people mentioned there as a thing. So the resources required to develop that means we have to kind of accept the assumptions made by the developing institution. And so it's sort of, we're all stuck in this boat. I think none of us are going to have the perfect locally ideal ontology. But many of us are going to have to, and it's not like it's even a bad thing. I think we should be grateful in some ways for what does work and sort of make the most of it, because it's also a lot of thinking required to have workarounds or sort of transforms or even discovery elements relative to what might be in the data that isn't, used very well in the ontology. So there's so much going on that I think that, once we kind of see that direction go in some direction, any direction, doesn't matter where it is. If it's like slowly moving toward an ontology such as BIBFRAME, we sort of have to accept that that's what's happening to a degree. Even if we can contribute some comments, we're not going to change the major direction because there's a ton of people investing in it in the same way. So it's sort of like a committee made up of, no people in a way. Is that too weird?
No, I think that's great because, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that a lot of it, that it's getting shaped by what LC feels matters. And I know, I know that some of this is, it's being shaped by a need to reconceptualize Mark, but not redo Mark, which I think is very challenging. And yes, we're all kind of following along according to what LC writes and decides.
And I'm not saying that to make any kind of critique, really, as much as I am acknowledging the power structures within the work that we have to do and the inevitable centralization that comes about once a standard-like thing gets implemented across many systems and many institutions. So I think there's just an aspect of that we sort of have to work with.
There's a comment from Paul Frank in the chat saying, also keep in mind he will maintain the ontology over time, things like extensions to BIBFRAME, for example, and which is kind of what I was thinking about when I asked a question earlier in the chat saying, to Jesse actually, about when you say resources, do you mean about staff skills or labor or like time, or do we mean like technical infrastructure like hosting? And there's also a couple of comments from Faith saying we're in the process of piloting a move from having our catalog stored in a relational database to it being in a graph database, which is quite a big move for us and why we spent a long time looking at appropriate data models. And Zoe asks, I wonder if ontologies can be designed to be maximally extensible or at least very accommodating of extensions. And before we go on to more comments, do you want to respond to any of that?
I think we're getting a lot of great feedback because one thing that happened when I went to the LoadLam conference, I was talking to a lot of people that were working with linked data in a very different way. And when I said, well, I've got this custom need, they said, the reaction I got from one person was, well, you're basically just using a database, it doesn't matter. And I think even when we were using databases underneath, we still, as librarians or other linked data professionals, we want to conform to the larger linked data infrastructure and be very mindful about what we're doing. I think that's because otherwise we're not really planning things out correctly if we're just going to paint ourselves into corners. so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always concerned with reuse, both of like our own data, but also we are cognizant of the fact that we won't always be able to create data for everything that we want to, and that we'll want to lean on other people's work. So there's a comment from John Huck. I think there's also a sense of we want standards to sustain our community exchange of data, but what other direction is available to us at the moment besides RDF for specifying a descriptive standard? XML was really the tool that for that we were all comfortable with. Shape expressions for RDF are coming along, but the paradigm shift to graph data brings a lot of change and holy grail potential, more than we expected. There's a number of comments.
Yeah, Zoe writes, yes, hopefully we can design ontologies, extensions that need minimal maintenance, like the presentation from earlier on minimal computing. And Eric Radio wrote, for those interested in maintenance, check out the aptly named The Maintainers, and he put a link for the maintainers.org. John Huck writes, we're along for the ride now in any case. And Jesse Lambertson writes, I'm happy that the extensions to BIBFRAME may provide some flexibility for adaptation into the future. So I think we're getting a lot of interesting feedback. Does anyone want to pass the mic? And I don't know if we missed anything, because again, the idea is for us to be, sharing as a group. Oh, sorry, Zoe, you only posted to the panelists.
Zoe, did we read all your comments out?
I wonder if Max, yeah, Zoe had written something about, I wonder if ontologies can be designed to be maximally extensible or at least very accommodating of extensions. That's a great thing. So what else are people thinking about? I'm going to check if I can see the results. So I'm sorry, folks, that the report display isn't showing our results, but I do have these links in the presentation attached to the session in Sched. So you can go back and check, and I will see if I can export them later, because I think it's interesting to see what people referred to with these issues. Because there were other things I didn't think about. And, I think we've talked about somewhat like the need for more complexity, because yeah, when you have rare materials, there are certain very specific things that you want to address, concepts that are not available elsewhere. I think we still have time if anyone wants to take the mic. Now, Paul Frank, you did decide to chime in here. Do you want to say anything while you're in the session?
Yeah, can you all hear? I'm so sorry. I was muted and I had a hard time unmuting myself.
That's okay. That's okay.
We can hear you.
That's so frustrating, because I'm yelling at my PC and I know no one can hear me. I knew that I was muted. Anyway, no, I'm just really, I'm not a technological expert on BIBFRAME, but I've observed BIBFRAME from the beginning. And I did work on the ARM ontology with the art and rare material ontology extensions to BIBFRAME. And that's why I was really concerned, because, and another one, by the way, is the medium of performance ontology that Stanford did as part of the LD4, the first grant. And, they were looking at CDOC-CRM and coming up with these great ontologies. But then the question became, well, who's going to maintain these? And, I'm sure that I can't speak for LC management, but wouldn't it be great if we could have one free source of endless maintenance of ontologies? But the reality is that's probably not going to happen. So that's why at LC, we intentionally had to keep ours pretty spare in terms of, you know, not getting into all the details that the specialized areas would get into. But I see it as a real issue, and I don't have an answer to it, but I just wanted to make sure that people think about these things, because it costs money to maintain these things. And like in the Wikidata presentation, or I mentioned Wikidata earlier, you know, what happens if Wikidata all of a sudden decides to sell their data to somebody else, and we lose anything that we put into it? So these are issues that always have to be thought about when you're dealing with ontologies, especially. Sorry to be so long-winded about it.
No, thank you for chiming in, Paul, because again, this is stuff that we really want to talk about, because yes, you can set up an ontology, but you can't just set it up and leave it up and abandon it. You know, it's a continuing work. It's maintenance. It's making adjustments, and you know, we know how long BIBFRAME has been, you know, being worked on, and I know that there's a great deal that you're very much involved in. So Faith writes, it has been interesting to us because when we started looking, we found we had more catalogs than we thought we did, but now we have a number of parallel or linked data projects, which we're hoping will join up in a sensible way. We're an archive rather than a library. Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. Are we developing different silos of data, or are we really developing it together? And Melanie Wacker already put another link about the BIBFRAME ontology extension, the ARM one, art and rare materials. Oh, that is the same one. So I think, yeah, these are some really good points. And Zoe Dobbs writes, ontology maintenance needs a strong community of subject matter experts, hopefully under some central organization, e.g. RBMS, BSC for ARM. Yeah, I mean, these are the things we're dealing with. Does anyone else want to chime in? Again, we're here to talk. It's not just me talking. I'm trying to get people to talk about it.
It looks like Nancy Lorimer has her hand up, so
oh, yes.
I have given her a chance to talk. Please talk about the music extension.
Please, Nancy, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't here for most of this because I had to eat lunch. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
The perform music ontology is actually a little more than a medium of performance ontology. It's just, that is the part that the Library of Congress has used, is the medium of performance aspect. It is a much larger ontology, in fact, and it sort of preceded Share VDE and whatever in actually, you know, having a sort of super work and that kind of thing in it, which is, all these ontologies were initially supposed to be given over to the particular community groups that were involved in my case, the Music Library Association. Music Library Association hasn't quite got to it yet, let's say. And so it is a little bit in limbo at the moment, and it's true, and keeping it up is hard. I say the other part of it is, though, eventually though, actually LC actually did tell us they would host it if we kept it, if Music Library Association kept it updated.
Jesse's asking, is MLA expected to take it over though? I guess you already answered that. It just sounds like it's not happening right now.
Yes, they should. It just hasn't happened. Or that was the plan initially. I need to talk to them again about it, but.
Nancy, how much do you think this is about trying to sell a community organization on something that they're not, you know, entirely sure that they need or want to commit to?
Oh, I don't think it's that. I think it's more, how do they do it? And, you know, who has the expertise to do it, and who has, you know, that kind of thing, really. It's more on, yeah, time, skills, and how how it works administratively within an association and that kind of thing. Just a lot of questions to answer that other things have come up, you know, and so forth. And I don't think they disapprove of it or anything. It's just, I mean, many people in MLA actually worked on it in the first place. It's just, you know, the way things have worked lately, it hasn't, we haven't quite got going. They were hoping to be able to test it in Sinopia, and we weren't able to get up something quick enough as yet. It was only partly done. And that's really what they're waiting for, is to be able to test it in real life before they commit to it.
Yeah, I asked a question in the chat earlier about whether any folks who attended the application profiles track or have been working on application profiles wanted to share anything about, you know, what kinds of constraints they run into when they're working with Sinopia, or just engaging in like a difficult process like creating metadata application profiles and how that affects their choices. There's a comment from Faith saying the data model we chose, Matterhorn RDF, told us they had stopped development / support for it when we told them that we were going to use their model, which did cause us to pause, but then we decided it actually working in our favor because we could build on it without needing to worry about splitting from future versions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Faith. So yeah, there's a lot of questions coming up. I think, so we have different issues with supporting and maintaining different ontologies. What do people feel about actually displaying these content to end users? Because I know we've talked about Sinopia, and in the library world, there's ILSs that work with MARC. I mean, where do people see it going? I know that with Share VDE, there's been presentations about how that particular platform supports linked data. Does anyone else have things that they want to share about this? And as Christine pointed out, you're welcome to speak out loud. We will give you the mic. This is just a place for talking. Faith? Okay, Faith's taking the mic.
Great, let me make sure that I can actually, hold on. There we are. Go ahead, Faith.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my name came up, so I think you probably can. Yes, so I'm based at the National Archives in the UK, and our system is, for the catalogue, is sort of past obsolete into staying up by hopes and prayers. So we've been looking at replacing it, and we're very much looking at going down the sort of linked data route for a number of reasons. So what we're currently looking at is what would be the back-end data. So it would be interacting with catalogers and archivists who need to add to the data that's coming in on a permanent basis, make corrections, edit it, but then it would go through a process by which it would be shared to front-end users, because they need to be able to see what records we have in the collection, so they can order them up and see what government has been up to for, you know, the last however long. So it's been an interesting sort of balance in terms of finding something that would allow us to be interoperable with the archive sector and with the wider GLAM sector, and to support the things like record closures, redactions, and also the fact that we've got a big mix of born physical and born digital works or records. And a lot of the data models we looked at either supported born physical works or supported born digital works well, but being able to cope with both, there weren't very many models that dealt with that particularly well. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to really document our data model and share that information, so that other groups can not only sort of see how it works, but also see our rationales behind it and that sort of stuff. So we're hoping this week we've got the stuff into RDF and we're about to, put it into something so we can see it a bit better and then start thinking about a sort of front end for the back end, as it were. So it's all been, it's the last sort of 6 months we've been working on this as quite a main project for us. And it's been really interesting. And hopefully, we've published some reports and stuff. If anybody's interested, I can put a link in the chat. But yes, it is very much about thinking about how to sort of which ontologies to use for cataloging and how to use it so it will promote reuse and archives for everyone and sort of those big policies. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. And yes, please put links in the chat if you have any resources you want to share, everyone. I think like the issues you brought up about finding the right data model and what you're dealing with at the front end and the back end are very relevant. I was also curious if you're looking at using something like SNAC, which is social networks and archival context, for connecting those to a larger set. And I need to go back to the chat. John Huck wrote something about that he came across DBpedia Archivo project to address the problem of abandoned ontologies and archive them so they can continue to be used. And that's a really fascinating resource I hadn't heard of. So thank you, because yes, when ontologies die, do they really die? Yeah, that's a really sad thought that we're getting into. Of course, I'm a metadata librarian, so I'm thinking it's sad that ontologies die, and it's been a long day. And Christine had brought up about the question of how to display RDA terms to users seems far from settled. And I understand, because in my repository, I'd really like to shift from Dublin Core creators and contributors to using role terms. And we don't really have a good way to set that up. They would have to do custom coding to do that. And it's really kind of frustrating, because I'm still kind of Dublin Core based, but I can throw in some BIBFRAME, and how do I do it the right way so that I get this really good fit? Because again, the concept for this presentation was to find a good fit, and I think we're finding that some of this is really tricky. So I'm seeing some other people making comments. Zoe Dobbs writes, I think there's a real need for ontology preservation, description, and discovery, basically good ontology libraries and archives. And Jesse Lamberson writes, even ontologies have histories. And I think that's a wonderful point. Thank you, everyone, because, and Faith has put a link for the National Archives work at the UK. So thank you, Faith. And this is some interesting stuff that we have. So we've had a lot of good points that people are bringing up. I think we still have a little bit more time. Does anyone want to pass the mic?
If I could say something one more time.
Sure.
It's a mix of the ontologies have history and the things about costs that Paul, were you bringing up maybe? I think if we look back at MARC, I mean, as our original ontology, which it is in a kind of way, you can think about it in the same thing. The MARC that we use is certainly not the MARC that was used in 1968, or even last year. We keep adding to it and taking away from it one way or other. But it also, though MARC is provided to us for free, it's not like that it doesn't cost money. We're just lucky that it's sort of maintained by government monies. But even MARC, we don't know if that'll be taken away from us too. One doesn't know for one reason or another. So one has to keep a perspective on ontologies, that ontologies do change. And yes, government money and lots of committee labor, or in our case, Mellon Foundation money and lots of community labor, keep these things up. And So it's always going to be difficult, and it always has been. And it's just something we need to learn to manage as we go along.
Yeah, so Christine chimed in that, yeah, government money and lots of committee labor. And yes, thank you, Nancy, for chiming in. We've had a lot of great comments, and as Jesse Lambertson writes, and Mark is still being developed. Yep. Thank you, Jesse. Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think earlier today, someone had brought up concerns about if, for instance, Wikidata goes away at some point. And that is a concern when we've seen what happened with DBpedia. So, I mean, there are these very heady questions about what we're doing. I think we still have a couple more minutes. Christine, does that seem fair? We have maybe
We've got 8 minutes.
8 minutes, so we still have time. You have your chance to grab the mic and speak. Dave Van Cleek writes, and down the road, there will be considerations around how the back-end data interacts with other aspects of typical ILS functions, e.g. ILL, enterprise systems, institutional user record loads, ... Absolutely correct. So yeah, we don't think about this stuff in a vacuum. It's really all these different considerations that are coming together, you know. There's, in terms of how we do this stuff. Jesse writes, yay, or yeah, this is part of LD4P's phase 3, the early part of that integration development. Does anyone want to chime in about the different phases with the LD4P? You can.
Michelle's on here.
Okay.
Phase 3 is it's called closing the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's primarily, the closing the loop is actually, you know, to say take Sinopia, and at the moment you can put things in Sinopia. The only way you can get things out of it is, you know, through a mass data download, basically. Whereas we want to, you know, be able to have it interact with other sources and so forth. The one certainly we're going to be interacting with is Share VDE. Also, I believe with OCLC, and so there, and with internal library systems as well. So a lot of that is the closing of the loop, that the data can move around. I'm not going to say that's all that it's about, but the very first phase, we were working basically in LD4P1, we were mostly working on ontologies and looking through them and working on that. In phase 2 and phase 2, we were looking at various workflows. And in phase 3 is basically the extension of that and actually implementing, connecting all the docs, some of the docs at least, together. That's very, very short form, so.
All right, so we have some more resources that have been shared via chat in terms of the progress of the LD4P work, and we also have information about a Mellon Foundation grant. And since we're getting close to the end, I just want to say, does anyone else have things they want to bring up about gaps in what they deal with, what they're dealing with these challenges? You know, when we go back to, you know, are you finding these gaps? Are these ontologies that are being addressed are they filling those gaps? Are you finding that perfect fit, or do you still feel like you're trying to reach that point? And how many ontologies do you need to use to get where you really want to be? I'm not seeing any responses, so maybe people are just still kind of grappling to find that perfect link data or metadata fit. And I think, as some people had pointed out earlier, a lot of this stuff is in a state of flux. We are still going through changes. It's not perfect. Michelle writes, finding the right ontologies from expert community seems like a challenge that doesn't have a perfect workflow to meet. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was another reason we were working on the various extensions and looking at what they did. The one thing that, I mean, BIBFRAME very much covers, in many ways, the current stuff we catalog and concentrate on.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, say, in the Perform Music ontology, we wanted to stretch out into events and other relationships and information that you could bring in that you can't bring in through MARC or other places like that. Using BIBFRAME and any extensions one wanted to make to be able to bring in interesting new relationships. One of the really basic relationships the Perform Music ontology wanted to do was relate a musician to his instrument, the person to the instrument, which you cannot actually do except in a note otherwise, which we were able to do. But so, I mean, the extensions were started because we felt there was a gap between what we had and what we wanted. And that's why there was the reason for the extensions in the first place. Combining various ontologies to make a perfect fit is a lovely idea, and it's a lovely thing to do in a perfect world, but you have to really be careful of how the inferencing works between your ontologies. We did manage to get events connected up to the basic CDOC CRM events, but it can be very difficult when they're heavily inferenced.
Thank you, Michelle. That's great. I think we're definitely finding that there is no perfect, and that's a good place for us to probably wrap up, because it's now 4:14. So the answer is we do have gaps. We're still working on this, and yeah, we don't have any perfect fit, but I think we've had some really interesting feedback. And yes, Jesse Lambertson writes, the work continues. And so this has been a really great opportunity to talk with all of you and share. And thank you again for our LD4 conference planners for making this possible in this online environment. So maybe we will discuss these issues again in person sometime when things are a little bit quieter in the world, or even in a virtual format, because it's really great to share as a group and learn and kind of reflect on why we do some of these things, because I know I find it really valuable. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your feedback, and I hope you learned a lot, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Anna Marie, for like bravely forging into this like virtual conference workshop space that none of us really fully understood how it would work. Oh, there's a last comment from John Huck saying, I think we tend to focus on finding properties and predicates when that's just one aspect of ontologies. Michael Ushold, in his OWL book, talks about linking to upper ontologies to hang specific concepts off. That's also a great thought. And there's a lot of stuff in the chat just coming in at the end, and a number of links. If it's useful to you, since this seemed to be a really link-heavy session, I've saved a copy of the chat, and I can probably just extract some of the links and maybe put them into a Google Doc and share them out. Does anybody think that that would be helpful? Yes, no?
Yeah, I'm going to save the chat myself too. And obviously, if people want to talk about this more in Slack, we can do that. I just thought it was really good to reflect on this stuff together.
I agree. Thanks everybody for coming to this, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much to all of you.